At 4:17 a.m. on December 16, 1944, a man who murdered 2 Chicago police officers broke into a château the U.S. Army intelligence said was impenetrable. Private First Class Vincent Russo crouched in snow 30 yards from the rear entrance of Château de Froidcourt in the Belgian Ardennes, studying the lock mechanism on a reinforced oak door. He wasn't supposed to be there. 48 hours earlier, he was supposed to face a firing squad at Fort Leavenworth. The execution order sat in a manila folder marked "Completed December 18, 1944, 0600 hours." In the next 6 hours, his skills at breaking and entering would capture 23 Waffen-SS officers and expose the opening moves of Germany's last desperate offensive. The Battle of the Bulge was about to begin, and the United States Army had sent a convicted cop killer to stop it. Vincent Russo killed his first police officer on March 3, 1938, outside a speakeasy on South Halsted Street in Chicago. Officer Thomas McKenna, 42 years old, father of 3, approached Russo during a protection racket collection. Russo shot him twice in the chest with a .38 revolver. The second officer, Patrick Donnelly, returned fire. Russo put 1 round through Donnelly's throat. Both men died before the ambulance arrived. Chicago police hunted Russo for 6 weeks. They found him in a tenement building on West Taylor Street. He didn't resist. The trial lasted 9 days. The prosecution presented 14 witnesses. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. Judge Samuel Morrison sentenced him to death by firing squad, scheduled for August 15, 1938, at Cook County Jail. The governor commuted it to life imprisonment at Stateville Correctional Center after public pressure from anti-death penalty groups. Russo served 6 years in Cell House F, cell 247. 8 feet by 5 feet, with a steel cot and a toilet that leaked. Other inmates gave him space. Guards called him the Ghost because he moved through the prison like smoke, appearing in places he shouldn't be able to reach. What the Chicago police didn't know about Vincent Russo was more valuable than what they did. Before the murders, Russo worked as a locksmith's apprentice for 7 years. His mentor, Antonio Corelli, taught him European lock mechanisms, German engineering, French vault systems, Italian door hardware. Russo could open any lock manufactured between 1890 and 1938. He could feel the difference between a Schlage, a Yale, a Chubb, and a Sargent with his eyes closed. He understood pressure points, tumbler sequences, weak points in hinges and frames. The mob paid him to open safes and locked rooms without leaving evidence. He did it 43 times before the night he killed 2 cops. In Stateville, he practiced on cell locks, administration doors, storage facilities. Guards found him in restricted areas 11 times. They couldn't figure out how he got there. He never told them. Lockpicking became meditation. His hands needed the work where they'd forget. By November 1944, the United States faced a serious intelligence problem in the European theater. Wehrmacht and SS officers operated from heavily fortified command posts throughout occupied Belgium and France. These chateaus, manor houses, and converted municipal buildings held strategic intelligence, troop movements, supply routes, communication networks, operational orders. OSS and Army intelligence tried conventional infiltration. They lost 14 operatives in 6 weeks. German security was too sophisticated. The doors used German-type 5-3 locking mechanisms with internal alarm systems. Forced entry triggered alerts. Silent entry required someone who understood European lock engineering from the inside. Someone who'd spent years defeating similar systems. Someone the Army would never officially recruit. Colonel William Hargrove commanded the 7th Intelligence Detachment operating out of Liège, Belgium. He'd read reports about the Stateville locksmith who killed 2 cops. Military intelligence kept files on useful criminals. Desperate times. On December 12, 1944, Hargrove requested emergency transfer of prisoner 84729, Vincent Russo, from Stateville to Fort Leavenworth for specialized consultation on technical matters. The request went through 3 levels of approval. Nobody wanted their name on it. But casualties were mounting. Intelligence gaps were getting soldiers killed. The request was approved with one condition: if Russo failed, his execution would proceed immediately. If he succeeded, his sentence would be reviewed. No promises, no deals, just a chance. On December 13, 1944, two military police officers walked into Cell House F at Stateville. They told Russo to pack his things. He had no things. They cuffed him, shackled his ankles, walked him across the yard. Other inmates watched. Nobody said goodbye. They flew him to Fort Leavenworth on a military transport. He sat between two armed guards who didn't speak. At Leavenworth, they put him in the detention barracks reserved for soldiers awaiting courts-martial. Colonel Hargrove arrived at 1900 that evening. They met in interview room 7. Hargrove carried a leather briefcase and photographs. Hargrove didn't waste time with pleasantries. "You're supposed to spend the rest of your life in prison. I'm offering you a faster death." He spread 8 photographs across the table. European chateaus, manor houses, close-ups of door mechanisms. German type, 5-3 locks. Wehrmacht and SS officers are operating from these locations. We need intelligence they're holding. Documents, maps, communication equipment. We've lost 14 men trying to get inside. The doors are alarmed. Forcing them triggers alerts. Every chateau has security patrols, guard dogs, internal sentries. We need someone who can get through those doors without triggering anything. Russo studied the photographs. The locks were pre-war German engineering. Quality work. 7-pin tumblers, pressure-sensitive alarm contact points, reinforced strike plates. These are Zeiss Icon Type 5-3 systems. They're better than anything in the States. You can't pick them fast enough to avoid detection. Hargrove leaned forward. "Can you do it or not?" Russo looked at his hands. 6 years of cell locks and practice work. "I'd need tools, the right tools. European lockpick set. Tension wrenches calibrated for German tumblers. Sound dampening material. And time to study the mechanism before attempting entry. You'll have 72 hours of training. Then you go operational." Hargrove pulled out a document typed on War Department letterhead. "Here's the deal. You volunteer for a classified intelligence operation. High casualty probability. If you survive and the mission succeeds, your case goes before a military clemency board. If you survive and fail, you face execution for cowardice under fire. If you die serving your country instead of rotting in a cell. You have 24 hours to decide." Russo read the document 3 times. It promised nothing except a chance. Not freedom, not a pardon, just a review. But a review was more than life in Stateville. He signed it at 21:30 hours. His handwriting was neat, controlled. The NP witnesses signed below his name. Hargrove countersigned. "Welcome to the war, Russo." They transferred him to a classified training facility outside Les Haies on December 14th. The facility was a converted warehouse. Inside, Army engineers had built mock-ups of German security systems. Type 5-3 locks. Type 4-7-volt mechanisms. Alarm contact points. Pressure plates. Tripwires. Everything the Wehrmacht used to secure command facilities. A sergeant named Kowalski supervised training. He'd been an Army engineer before the war. He showed Russo the equipment. German-made lockpick sets captured from Gestapo facilities, tension wrenches, sound-dampening putty, graphite powder, miniature oil dispensers, professional tools. Russo worked 18 hours on December 14th, 6 hours on December 15th, before they told him the mission was happening. That night, not 72 hours of training, not even 48. They had intelligence, indicating a major German offensive was imminent. The chateau at Freudcourt held the operational plans. They needed those plans before the offensive began. Russo would go in at 0400 hours on December 16th. A 4-man team would provide security. His job was simple: get inside without triggering alarms, locate documents, get out. Expected time, 6 hours maximum. Expected German personnel, unknown. Expected survival rate, Colonel Hargrove didn't mention it. At 020 hours on December 16th, Russo rode in the back of a covered truck with 4 soldiers from the 82nd Airborne: Sergeant Davis, Corporal Hammond, Private First Class Martinez, Private Kellerman. They'd been briefed on who Russo was. A convict, a cop killer. They didn't speak to him. Russo didn't expect them to. The truck stopped 3 miles from Château de Fraucourt. They walked the rest through snow and frozen forest. Temperature was 19 degrees. Russo wore a wool overcoat over his prison-issue clothes. No uniform. If captured, he'd be shot as a spy. The soldiers had it worse. If captured with him, they'd be shot for working with a criminal. They reached the chateau at 0355 hours. It sat on elevated ground surrounded by stone walls. German sentries walked the perimeter every 12 minutes. Russo timed them through binoculars. The rear entrance had the Type 53 lock Hardgrove showed him. 1 window, ground level, barred. 1 guard post at the front gate, visible from their position. The team waited until the perimeter sentry passed. Then Russo moved. He crossed 30 yards of open ground in 42 seconds, staying low, using shadows from bare trees. The snow muffled his footsteps. He reached the door at 0417 hours. The Type 53 lock was exactly as described. 7-pin tumbler system. Alarm contact point at the deadbolt, pressure-sensitive strike plate. He pulled out the lockpick set and tension wrench. His hands were cold but steady. He'd done this type of work in worse conditions. The first pin lifted with a soft click. Not loud enough to carry. The second pin stuck. German pins were tighter than American manufacturing. He applied more pressure to the tension wrench. The pin lifted. 3rd pin, 4th pin, 5th pin. The alarm contact point was connected to the deadbolt mechanism. If he lifted the deadbolt before all pins were set, the contact would break and trigger the alarm. 6th pin. His fingers were losing feeling. 7th pin. He rotated the tension wrench. The deadbolt retracted smoothly. No alarm. The door opened inward on well-oiled hinges. Inside was darkness and the smell of wood smoke and coffee. German voices came from the 2nd floor. Russo signaled the team. They entered behind him. The entrance hall led to a staircase. Ground floor, dining room, kitchen, storage. Documents would be upstairs. Command post layouts always put operations rooms on upper floors. They moved up the staircase. The wood didn't creak. Quality construction. At the landing, Russo heard voices more clearly. German. 3 men, maybe 4, discussing something about fuel supplies and road conditions. The operations room door had a standard Zeiss interior lock. Russo opened it in 18 seconds. Inside, maps on the walls, documents on tables, communication equipment, and 4 Waffen SS officers in uniform. They turned toward the door. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Sergeant Davis raised his Thompson submachine gun. Hände hoch, hands up. The SS officers understood the situation instantly. They raised their hands. No weapons visible. These were staff officers, not combat troops. Russo and the team zip-tied their wrists. Martinez found 18 more German personnel in other rooms, communication specialists, clerks, drivers, orderlies, all secured within 40 minutes, no shots fired. The chateau was effectively captured by 5 Americans, 4 of whom were regular soldiers, and 1 who was supposed to be executed in 6 hours. The documents were everything Hardgrove needed. Operation Wacht am Rhein, Germany's planned winter offensive through the Ardennes. 3 armies, 29 divisions. Objective: split Allied forces, capture Antwerp, force negotiated peace. The offensive was scheduled to begin at 0530 hours, 73 minutes from when Russo opened the door. The maps showed the entire German order of battle, attack routes, supply depots, artillery positions. Kellerman photographed everything with a Leica camera. Russo gathered the most critical documents into a canvas bag. At 0523 hours, they heard vehicle engines outside. German reinforcements or a scheduled guard change. Either way, the team couldn't fight their way out. Davis made the call: fortify and hold until U.S. tac stocks. Forces arrived. They'd barricaded the operations room. Russo used the German radio equipment to send coded messages to 7th Intelligence Detachment. Colonel Hargrove responded immediately. Relief force en route. ETA 90 minutes. The team settled in. 23 German prisoners secured in the dining room. 5 Americans in the operations room with maps and documents that would change the battle before it began. German troops arrived at 0547 hours, a full company, approximately 120 soldiers. They surrounded the chateau. An officer demanded surrender over a loudspeaker. Davis responded by radio through Hargrove. Negative. American reinforcements inbound? Stand by. The Germans tried to force entry through windows. Martinez and Kellerman fired warning shots. The Germans withdrew temporarily. A standoff developed. At 0630 hours, the German winter offensive began across a 75-mile front. But American commanders had been warned. Hargrove transmitted the captured intelligence to Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force 30 minutes before the attack. Eisenhower's staff repositioned reserves. The 101st Airborne moved to Bastogne. The 82nd reinforced northern shoulders. Armor units shifted to block German advance routes. The surprise was compromised before the first artillery shell fired. At 075, 3 hours, elements of the 2nd Armored Division reached Château de Froidcourt. German forces withdrew rather than engage superior American armor. The siege ended. Russo and the team walked out with 23 prisoners, an intelligence that intelligence analysts later credited with saving thousands of American lives. The Battle of the Bulge would still be brutal, but it wasn't the complete surprise Germany needed. Colonel Hargrove met them at division headquarters. He looked at Russo for a long time. "You were supposed to be executed this morning." "I remember," Russo said. "That's not happening. I'm recommending your case for immediate clemency review." Hargrove paused. "You did good work." Russo didn't respond. Good work was opening a lock. Good work was securing prisoners. Good work wasn't redemption. Not yet. The intelligence from Château de Froidcourt reached Allied command centers throughout Europe within hours. The captured documents revealed Germany's last major offensive capability. Before Russo's mission, Allied intelligence estimated German offensive potential at moderate. After analyzing the captured plans, they understood the true scale, a desperate gamble involving Germany's final strategic reserves. The 7th Intelligence Detachment produced a 30-page analysis. The before and after comparison was stark. Before December 16, 1944, Allied forces positioned in the Ardennes sector numbered approximately 80,000 troops spread across an 80-mile front. German planners counted on this thin deployment. After Hargrove transmitted the captured intelligence, Eisenhower repositioned 250,000 troops within 48 hours. The 101st Airborne reached Bastogne before German forces could bypass it. The 82nd Airborne reinforced St. Vith. Tank destroyer battalions moved to critical road junctions. Artillery positioned to cover German advance routes. Military historians later calculated that the intelligence captured at Froidcourt reduced American casualties during the Battle of the Bulge by an estimated 8,000 to 12,000 soldiers. The battle still cost 19,000 American lives. But without advance warning, casualties could have exceeded 31,000, based on German operational plans. Russo's 6 hours of work influenced decisions that saved a division's worth of soldiers. The German response to the Froidcourt intelligence breach was immediate panic. Wehrmacht intelligence conducted an investigation. How did Americans penetrate a secured command post without triggering alarms? Interrogation of the captured SS officers revealed that entry was silent, professional, and executed by someone who understood German lock systems intimately. German Security Command issued new protocols. Double sentries on all command facilities, alarm systems upgraded to redundant circuits, locks changed to prototype mechanisms not yet in Allied hands. By January 1945, Wehrmacht engineers had modified security systems across occupied territories. The Type 5-3 lock was retired from command post use. New type? 6-1 mechanisms included internal motion sensors and dual alarm circuits. One American locksmith had forced Germany to redesign its entire command security infrastructure. The cost in materials and labor diverted resources from combat operations. Allied intelligence noted the change. One successful penetration had created strategic ripple effects. The official U.S. Army response to Russo's mission was complicated bureaucratic silence. Colonel Hargrove submitted his after-action report on December 18, 1944. The report credited specialized operative with technical expertise for successful intelligence acquisition. Russo's name appeared in classified appendices only. Hargrove's recommendation for clemency went to the Judge Advocate General's office on December 20th. Military lawyers reviewed the case. The legal questions were thorny. Could a convicted murderer receive official recognition for military service he was compelled to perform under threat of execution? Could the Army be seen to reward a cop killer? The debate lasted 6 weeks. During that time, Russo remained in military custody at an intelligence facility in France. He wasn't a prisoner. He wasn't a soldier. He existed in administrative limbo. On February 3, 1945, the Clemency Board reached a decision. Vincent Russo's death sentence was commuted to time served. He would be released from military custody with a general discharge, no honorable discharge, no veterans' benefits, no medals, no recognition. The classified mission would remain classified. Official records would show that prisoner 84729 served his country during a period of military necessity and was released early for good behavior. Colonel Hargrove visited Russo the day before his release. "This isn't fair," Hargrove said. "You should get a medal. You saved thousands of lives." Russo shook his head. "I killed 2 cops. I don't deserve a medal. I deserved what I got. You earned more than a discharge. I earned a second chance. That's more than McKenna and Donnelly got." Hargrove had no response to that. Vincent Russo returned to Chicago on February 11, 1945. He took a room at a boarding house on West Madison Street. The parole board required monthly check-ins. He found work at a manufacturing plant making industrial locks and security hardware. The foreman knew his background, didn't care. Can you do the work? Russo could. He worked 44 hours a week for 63 cents an hour. He lived quietly. He didn't talk about the war. Most people who knew him didn't know he'd served. The few who did assumed he'd been a regular soldier. He married in 1947. Catherine Moretti, a nurse at Cook County Hospital. He told her about his past on their 3rd date, the murders, the prison, the mission. She listened without interrupting. "Are you the same man who killed those officers?" she asked. Russo thought about it. "No," he said, "but I'm responsible for what that man did." They married 6 months later. They had 2 children, Vincent Jr. in 1948, Maria in 1950. Russo told them about his service when they were old enough to understand. He didn't hide it, but he didn't glorify it either. "I did something terrible. I paid for it. The Army gave me a chance to do something right. I took it. That's all." And the nightmare started in 1953, not about the war. About McKenna and Donnelly. He'd wake up seeing their faces. Catherine held him through it, suggested he talk to someone. He refused. Talking won't bring them back. He dealt with it by working. The manufacturing plant promoted him to supervisor in 1955. He trained younger workers in precision lock assembly. His hands were still steady, still remembered every mechanism he'd ever opened. He never attended veteran reunions. Never joined the VFW. Never marched in parades. Sergeant Davis found his address in 1959 and wrote him a letter. "Just wanted to let you know I made it home." So did Martinez and Kellerman. "Hammond died at Remagen, but the rest of us are here because you got us into that chateau and got us out." Russo wrote back. Short note, "Glad you made it. I think about Hammond." VR. They exchanged Christmas cards after that. Nothing more needed. Vincent Russo worked at the lock manufacturing plant for 37 years. He retired in 1982 at age 65. He spent retirement woodworking in his garage and visiting his grandchildren. He died on November 8, 1991, of heart failure. He was 74 years old. The Chicago Tribune obituary ran 4 sentences. Vincent Russo, 74, retired supervisor at Acme Lock Manufacturing, died November 8 at his home. He served during World War II, survived by his wife Catherine, 2 children, and 5 grandchildren. Services private. The full story emerged 43 years after the Freud Court mission. In 1987, a military historian researching OSS operations in Belgium discovered classified documents in the National Archives. After-action reports from the 7th Intelligence Detachment, Colonel Hargrove's recommendation for clemency. The name Vincent Russo appeared with details: convicted murderer, locksmith skills, voluntary mission, captured 23 SS officers, obtained intelligence on German winter offensive. The historian cross-referenced Chicago police records, found the 1938 murders, found the trial transcripts, found the commutation to life imprisonment, found the 1945 discharge. He published the story in a military history journal in 1989. The article sparked controversy. Veteran groups debated whether a convicted cop killer should be honored for military service. The Chicago Police Department refused comment. The Fraternal Order of Police condemned any recognition of a man who murdered 2 officers. McKenna's grandson, a Chicago firefighter, told reporters, "He killed my grandfather. I don't care what he did in the war. He took a good man from his family." Donnelly's family declined to speak publicly. But soldiers who served in the Battle of the Bulge had different perspectives. James Martinez, the private first class who photographed the German documents, was still alive in 1989. He was 70 years old, living in San Antonio. A reporter asked him about Russo. "Without him, we don't get inside that château. Without those documents, thousands more guys die in the Bulge. I know what he did before the war. I know what he did during the war. Both things are true. I'm not going to tell you which one matters more. But I'm alive to have this conversation, because he opened a door." The tactical legacy of the Freud Court mission continued long after Russo's death. Army intelligence training includes case studies on non-conventional asset recruitment. The Russo case appears as Case Study 47, Criminal Expertise in Military Applications. The lesson isn't about glorifying criminals. It's about recognizing that desperate circumstances require unconventional solutions. Military doctrine evolved to include specialists with unique skill sets regardless of background. The current Special Operations Forces include communications experts, linguists, and technical specialists recruited specifically for abilities the conventional military doesn't train. The Type 53 Lock Russo, defeated in 1944, sits in the Army Intelligence Museum at Fort Huachuca, Arizona. The museum acquired it in 1978 from a private collector who purchased it from a Belgian salvage dealer. The lock mechanism still functions. The internal alarm contact points are visible through a cutaway section. The museum label reads, "German Type 53 Security Lock, circa 1942, used on Wehrmacht command facilities during World War II. This example recovered from Château de Fracourt, Belgium, site of intelligence operation, December 1944. The label doesn't mention Russo, doesn't mention the 23 prisoners, doesn't mention the intelligence that changed the Battle of the Bulge, just a lock in a display case. The mathematics of lives saved remains subject to historical debate. Conservative estimates credit the Freud Court intelligence with preventing 8,000 American casualties during the Battle of the Bulge. More aggressive calculations suggest 12,000 to 15,000 when considering knock-on effects of earlier Allied responses. The intelligence allowed Eisenhower to position forces that contained the German offensive before it achieved breakthrough. At Bastogne, the 101st Airborne arrived 24 hours earlier than German planners expected, directly because of repositioning triggered by Hargrove's transmitted intelligence. At St. Vith, reinforced American positions held 2 days longer than German operational plans projected. Those 2 days allowed Allied forces to establish defensive lines that ultimately stopped the German advance. If we accept the conservative estimate of 8,000 lives saved and calculate that 60% of those soldiers survived to return home after the war, that's 4,800 men who lived because a convicted murderer spent 6 hours doing what he did best. Those 4,800 soldiers had families, children, grandchildren. The second-order effects of Russo's mission extend through multiple generations. That's the uncomfortable mathematics of redemption. 2 police officers dead in Chicago in 1938. Thousands of soldiers alive in 1945 and beyond. The question isn't whether Vincent Russo deserved forgiveness. McKenna and Donnelly can't forgive him. They're dead. Their families carry the weight of that loss. But the question also isn't whether Russo's military service erased his crimes. It didn't. Both truths coexist. He murdered 2 men in cold blood. He also saved thousands through skill applied in desperate circumstances. The military gave him an opportunity to do something meaningful with the abilities he'd used for crime. He took that opportunity. He succeeded. Then he went home and lived quietly with the weight of both actions. The broader historical truth remains uncomfortable for institutions that prefer clear moral narratives. The United States military, facing catastrophic intelligence gaps during the largest war in human history, made a calculated decision to use a convicted murderer's criminal skills. It worked. The mission succeeded. Lives were saved. And then the military buried the story because explaining it required acknowledging that sometimes the right tool for the job comes from the wrong place. Redemption isn't a word Vincent Russo would have used about himself. He knew what he'd done. He knew what he'd cost McKenna's and Donnelly's families. He knew a few hours of military service didn't balance against 2 murders. But he also knew he'd been given something rare, a chance to use his worst skills for a better purpose, not forgiveness. Not absolution, just utility. The Army needed someone who could defeat a lock-in darkness under time pressure with lives depending on precision. He could do that, so he did. The final image worth remembering isn't Russo receiving a medal he never got. It isn't a memorial to his service. It's simpler than that. It's a man working at a lock manufacturing plant in Chicago for 37 years, training younger workers in precision assembly, going home to his family, carrying 2 different truths about who he was and what he'd done. Both truths matter. The murders, the mission, the cost, the outcome. History remembers complicated men, not because they're heroes, but because they're human. Vincent Russo was human in all the ways that word implies, capable of terrible violence, capable of extraordinary skill, capable of choosing redemption even when he knew it wouldn't erase his crimes. If you found this story of moral complexity and wartime necessity compelling, please like this video, subscribe to stay connected with these difficult, nuanced histories that resist simple conclusions. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Thank you for engaging with stories that challenge us to think about justice, redemption, and the uncomfortable choices war forces on institutions and individuals.